So I'm going to start off just because I love the way you used your camera and the score as leading characters in this film. The way your camera pushes into shots, these wide, amazing wonders you're doing at times. I'm just interested to know, as a director, the choice of using a camera, almost like Sam Raimi Evil Dead style, as we're like pushing into things, the choice to use it as a character almost in your film.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm so psyched. That's so cool that you noticed that, man. Well, that all comes from having an amazing collaborator in Kareem Hussein, my cinematographer, who is absolutely all world. And he and I went through 6 drafts of our shot list throughout pre-production. And on my first movie I got to direct, I didn't even get through the end of shot list until the whole thing prep was over. And so we got through 6 drafts this time, and we had kind of, and we're both nerds, and when as 2 nerds get together, it's like 2 computers talking to each other, and just lines of code basically. And we started just like, as soon as the very first morning that we started planning this thing, we knew we'd figured out pretty quickly what we think the colors would be. And over the drafts, we realized what the energy should be, because there's the way we tint it, and then there's the way we light it, but there's also what the thing does, like you noticed. And so we kind of decided we wanted our camera to act like, the goofy term we came up with was curious ghost.
Yeah, like a POV almost. Yeah.
And this kind of ethereal presence that can kind of go places that we can't, and it brings the audience into shit, and it also kind of pulls them back. And we tried to play with 2 equally unpleasant sensations. One is being in the midst of the violence and feel it and having it happen to you, or being just far back enough that you're helpless to do anything about it, and you just feel like watching something. So we kind of try to be we approach and we back up kind of based on where the story was at. But yeah, it was the movies that we were talking about, like we nailed the color pretty quickly, because I came in with an instinct that it should have a kind of pinkish energy to it, which is my way into that was, on a Christmas tree, when all the multicolored lights are firing at once, the kind of totality of it is this pink kind of. And Kareem showed up with this like real strong instinct that the thing should be cyan and amber. And I was like, well, cyan and amber, or cyan and pinkish, that is north or south of red and green, and there's a lot of Christmas in the DNA of the film, and so it seemed to kind of lend itself in a real facile way there. But yeah, we just knew that we want to play with the audience's participation, and having the camera go super close to some stuff but fall real far back on some other stuff, kind of it allows for that. And it kind of, ideally, it makes the audience, it prevents them from ever getting their sea legs, from ever getting too comfortable with what's going on. We want to sort of establish a language and then ideally rip it from them.
It's insane. And I won't give anything away spoiler wise, but there's a shot later in the film with the Christmas lights as Jesse's walking through, and it's just the way it was so cool. And so I want to talk to you about just kind of the designs of your shots. So for example, you brought something up very interesting just now about getting in on the violence and then stepping away. And I'll refer to these vaguely. There's a shootout scene where you're far away from the violence. Then there's a stabbing scene, which I would argue is like, until I saw this, Zodiac's beach stabbing scene was probably Fincher, whatever he did on that scene horrified me to this day. But you go very deep into a stabbing sequence in this film without giving anything away story-wise. Can you talk about the decision of taking us into that moment and kind of really how you achieve a stabbing scene like that? I would imagine it has something to do with sound design. Is the knife like retracting? I mean, it's such a brutal scene. Just wondering how you did it.
Oh, thank you, man. That's I appreciate you saying that. I'm real proud of that sequence. And so it's cool that you mentioned Zodiac, because the kind of our two reference points for gore in this movie were Zodiac and Irreversible.
Oh
Those
my! Irreversible is the only movie I have ever turned off and didn't finish. After the freaking fire extinguisher won her with the spin, I was out, man. I had never got to the Monica Bellucci stuff. I don't ever want to see that movie.
It's that speaks to its impact, I think. And because so how do we build that? We start with, it starts in a real hokey ideological way. It starts in conversations with my best friend, or one of my best friends, George, who choreographed all the fights, all the kills in this movie. He's a very, very talented actor, but also very talented veteran martial artist and stunt performer. And he and I would get into a lot of just real earnest kind of film nerd conversations. And in the backyard one day, we were kind of getting into what are our favorite kind of fights and kills? What about them sings in a movie? And what is it that is left to kind of add? Like, what part of the language is there left for us to kind of add into it? And, you know, we kind of realize something, which is when you're out and about, and there's a kind of a social contract we all participate in. You know, you wake up and you go catch the bus and you queue up and you wait your turn and you pay your taxes and you hold the door open and blah, blah, blah. And the world just moves at a kind of a pace, and there's a music to it. But then when a car wreck happens, or a car wreck happens, or a bar fight breaks out or something like that, the music goes away completely. And all of a sudden it's operating at it's operating at a meter none of us can hear, and it seems like it's operating at a meter that the participants can't even hear. And so this could be 30 seconds, this could be 2 hours, this could be a week. You don't know because no frame of reference. And so we were like, okay, what is that, and how do you communicate that? Okay, well, you start with who's in control in a kill scene in a movie. Well, it's the kill. And that's where the control dynamics stem from, right? So if that guy is as prey to his own emotions and adrenaline and the moment itself as the victims are, well, boy, then you're dealing with a rabid dog, and you don't know what he'll do next. And
yeah,
so,
he was almost like a little kid. Like when he would get out of his car or the van, he was like, he'd stomp around like an immature baby. Like, I like that.
Yeah, amping, or exactly right, or like amping himself up like he's about to go play a shift of hockey, right?
Yeah,
like, that's kind of like, so because humans are scary and monsters aren't. Because a monster you will always end up being able to dismiss in some way because it's not real. But a human, with all of our imperfections and our contradictions, that's the scariest, I think. And so we really endeavored to just try to humanize all of it. And we didn't want it, and we wanted to bury the blocking and the choreography and the sequenciness of it as best as we could. Because that's another thing, like, so you and I have shelves very similar. We've watched a lot of movies, right? Yeah. And if you've ever seen an action movie or a horror film, you can reasonably deduce once a sequence has started when it's going to end, right? Like, so when a car chase happens, you know, oh, this is my life for the next probably 4 minutes, right? When a killing scene happens in a horror movie, you feel the sequence has begun. Therefore, you can predict when it's going to end. Therefore, it's not as scary as it could be. And so we did our best to bury the sequenciness of it. And to bury the choreography. We wanted it to be clumsy and start-stoppy and sad and small too, because that's the other thing, is like a lot of horror films have a tendency to always go operatic with their violence, and I understand that inclination, but I suspect it ultimately ends up making you less scared because it's not real. When something happens to a body that can't actually happen to physical anatomy, as an audience member, you are shocked. And there might be an adrenaline rush and you're like floored, but you're not scared. That's nothing scary about that. And if you watch real documentary footage of actual violence, it's muted, and it's kind of it's organic, and it's non-smooth, and it kind of just so we just tried to our best to make as harsh and authentic a version of that as we could, because I also think that part of the film's DNA is hopefully getting people to analyze, if not question, their viewing and reading habits. And so basically, we try to take the fun out of it. There should be nothing fun about watching this shit happen.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's interesting to me because, and I'll move on like from a different topic at this point, but that scene you're referring to specifically, I think what horrified me the most about it was the girl who's driving's reaction as she just sat there helpless while this. I mean, it's such a disturbing scene. I almost had to walk away for a second. It was in the best way possible. I loved how you opened your film. You open your film jarringly on a door, and we push in, and then about 5 minutes later, you jump to this amazing credit sequence, which is, very, again, Fincher, like Fight Club-esque, like very, like, synth over the top. And then at the end of the credits, you actually put the title of your movie at the end of the credit moment, not like generally in the beginning. Can I ask the decision on that? I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So so the kind of genesis of the title sequence is like, in one of the later drafts of the script, I just put that into the script. Up until that point, it had opened with sort of a filmic version of one of the kills from the comic book, and I didn't know quite. It just was never landing the way that it should. And then I started thinking about, like, maybe if we show the root of Todd's POV and the root of the comic book, and show all the ingredients, the cultural ingredients that went into it, that might be an interesting place to start from. And we started with that. And then our assistant editor, Nathan Boone, he started mocking up something really, really, really cool. And he took kind of my suggestion and ran with it. And then it just kind of got coats of paint on it. And I honestly, I feel like it was probably Nathan's first pass at ending with the title, but we were just like, we played around with it, and it just kind of rocked. And sometimes there's a metric for shit, and sometimes there isn't. And sometimes you just like know something is cool when you see it, kind of like, on the title page of our script, not that anybody cares, nobody cares about this, but it's the best title page of a script I've ever been a part of. Jesse, in copy and pasting, there was a formatting error, and when he went to go to the title page, Random Acts of Violence got all weirdly spaced out. So it was like RAN and then D and then OM, and it just kind of got all weird.
Oh.
And I thought, and then
that's how it was in the movie, right?
And I said to Jesse, like, that looks wicked. He's like, what? And he's like, oh God, I was supposed to change that. There's just like clumsy accident. I was like, no, it looks fucking awesome. And so I think part of the fun of making a movie is like allowing for the stork to kind of just drop stuff on you once in a while, like these happy accidents, like, and by the way, mind you, one of the best cuts in the history of cinema is a happy accident. Lawrence of Arabia, him blowing out the match, that was just how it got lined up, and you're like, oh, well, that's amazing. And like you could write a thesis on that cut, and yet it was just something that, the stork dropped on David Lean's lap.
Yeah, you had an amazing cut in this film. Again, I'll be vague, where the young to old cut. That's all I will say.
Cool.
That was a really cool cut. I want to talk to you about emotion. So one of the things about horror or thriller or psychological elements of filmmaking is you have to build character. Character is so important. Like, I just saw Dave Franco's movie, The Rental, recently, and like he builds character for 30 minutes prior to anything kind of crazy going down. And I find that interesting because I guess that's the medicine and the sugar thing you were referring to kind of in the dialogue, which I thought was kind of cool. But there's two emotional beats that really hit me. One of them obviously is towards the end with Jordana, which I won't say anything specifically, but it's her monologue about death.
Yeah.
That was absolutely just heart-wrenching.
Thanks.
But earlier on, there's a character who specifically talks about a smiling picture of a victim.
Yeah.
And the idea that, like, why is she smiling? And you go, and the character says, oh, well, she doesn't know she's about to die. And it's like, I found that to be such a brilliant way to think about somebody's picture after they pass away. It's almost like my wife and I will watch a horror film together sometimes, and she'll go, why is that person going in there? I'm like, baby, we know we're watching a movie. We know more than they do. The character has no idea that they're in the middle of a horror film. So can you talk about that specific element and kind of like, it's a kind of a really very powerful way to look at death and just characters. I'm just interested to know like how that came about.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, man. That's you put all these kind of little touches in the thing, and you don't know how much any of it's going to land. So it's a special thing when someone notices it. Yeah, I was trying to. I think we were trying to put a name to that discomfort you feel when you make a kind of, when you're interested in true crime. There's an inherent sort of Faustian bargain we seem to make with ourselves, where because we're so interested in how crazy and weird and fascinatingly awful this stuff can be, we sort of. I'll stop saying we. I'll say me. I can sometimes get caught up in the grandeur and largesse of what the bad person did.
Yeah, like the Ted Bundy documentaries, like all that. Like people became fans of him. Like, it's so weird.
We can name all of them like rock stars, but we can't name most of the people that they hurt.
Which is Jordana's character's arc.
Whole thing, man. And it's like, yeah, like Google Ted Bundy. And then Google Ted Bundy victims, and you're gonna see fragments. You're gonna see photos of people who had no idea what was coming, and there's something really heartbreaking about being in on a joke after the fact.
I agree with you. I never thought that this is the first time I've ever actually thought about giving my thought a reason as to why I feel that way. Like your movie basically solved that uncomfortable feeling I wonder that I have when it's interesting. I've never thought about it like that before.
Thank you. That means the world, man. Well, it's reflective of a process that I'm still going through, which is like, how do I reconcile my interest in awful stuff with my humanity, and I keep having to give credit where credit's due. I read a book by Anne Rule like 10 years ago, and she looms pretty high in true crime, and I think she kind of gets it in that her book about the Green River Killer is one of the heaviest things I've ever read, because what it really functions as is a series of 1 chapter long biographies of each of his victims. And so it starts at their childhood, and you go, so, and how every one of these stories ends. And she gives very little real estate in her book to him. I don't even know that she gives him a full name in referencing him. And she talks about the beginning about how, we talk about the Green River Killer because he has a pretty crazy record of like 40 plus or whatever it is. And she says like, but these aren't statistics. Every single one of these was someone's sister or mom or friend or cousin or daughter. And what is a life? A life is a series of moments. And I look back on my 38 years of victories and defeats and heartbreaks and in-betweens and finding stuff funny and being mad and all these different, and every single victim had that. And it was the first time in reading that book that I felt the weight of it, and I got what she was trying to do. And it kind of like, it saved me and it spoiled me. So I can no longer just watch stuff with reckless abandon anymore, but I'm happy about that, And so I guess I was just trying to find a way to shine a light on what I feel in the pit of me whenever I see a photo of a victim. It's always somebody, typically it's someone in a happier time, in a crystallized moment, and knowing what's to come and knowing that they don't know it, is there's something real kind of heartbreaking about that. And I think that like I'm still interested in the stuff I'm interested in. I just make sure that I never lose sight of what the cost of it is. And I try my best to imbue this fascination with an understanding of like, every time I don't acknowledge, or every time I pay attention to like I said, the sort of grandeur of what the killer did, every time I sort of focus on that at the expense of the victim's experience, I know I've made that killer less of a man and more of a monster. And like what I was saying before, of like when we turn killers into monsters, we almost remove responsibility from them because they're monsters, right? And I think that that's something like, that's a conversation in the movie as well.
I mean, you use color so well. We were discussing color at the beginning of the conversation. And I've always been fascinated, like going back to Argento's, like Suspiria, the way he used color. Obviously, I remember reading a whole article about Breaking Bad and the way they used color in that show. I know it's different genres, but you obviously have very specific color tones. Like there's green, very heavy green in some of the car scenes. There's heavy red. Obviously, you were talking about the other different color tones within the killer's. Oh, God, I love those shots when we're like circling around the killer's room and stuff like that. That like, yeah. And I was just interested to know, like, achieving those greens and those reds. Is that something you do in camera, or do you have to enhance that in post? Like, can you achieve that fully in camera?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, that's the cool thing. And I think like, you definitely clean and polish the thing in post, but we that was something else we had decided pretty early on. We wanted as much of our movie to be as in camera as possible. Yeah. And so when I remember our first AD, when we were shooting the flashback scene, the Christmas dinner, he was like, I feel like I'm I feel like I'm living in the cover of the My Bloody Valentine record, Loveless. Like, because it was just like, so it was very, very much, it was very, very practical. In fact, the sort of driving shots of the man's van, all the sort of driving shots along the lonely highways, there's a green tint on that as well. And that's literally our camera car has got a crew on it. It's got our camera. It's also got a 12K light with a green gel on the front. So we're driving around with this green light in the van in the arse end of the Ontario wilderness. And so yeah, it was something, and it was something we really, really played with a lot in prep. I think I still have Kareem's book of color, of different, of like little color filters, and so yeah, we wanted to rely on post as little as possible, and so and for me that was very important because my first film had over 700 VFX shots in it, and so I was like, I don't want to have a gaping hole that's ultimately up to someone else. Like I want to prevent that as best I can, like I got to approve the stuff and I give notes on it, but ultimately I'm like still just kind of fingers crossed this better look good, because if it doesn't, I have 700 shots in this movie that are going to be really awkward. So practical wherever we could.
Oh yeah, anytime you can do anything in camera. I read a story the other day about, I can't wait to see Tenet. Nolan apparently crashed the 747 into this hangar, and it was because it was cheaper than doing it on CGI. Yeah, I'm like, of course, like, as you do. This is obviously something that I find interesting. When I sat down, so I do interviews. This is like my job for a living. I watch films and interview people who are behind them. I was lucky enough to sit down with Jordan Peele for Get Out, and obviously that was a brilliant horror film, and as was Us. I loved Us. But I find it so interesting when somebody comes, and I feel like this is a question you've probably been asked already, but I'm very interested to know like kind of the details of it. And going from comedy to horror, they're very similar things. Comedy and horror, in the sense of the reaction they invoke from an audience, they have very similar details. But you look at Jordan, who comes from comedy, does Get Out and Us. Dave Franco comes from comedy, does The Rental. You obviously come from comedy as well. I've interviewed you multiple times over the years. what is it about that idea of like starting in comedy and finding a horror outlet? When does that passion ignite? Because I feel like, I'm assuming you grew up loving horror films, but you made a career in comedy. So where does that transition happen for you? And like, when do you know I want to start telling some really dark stories?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I don't. So all I can speak to is for me, and for me, I know that I started acting when I was 12, but I had told my parents that I wanted to be a director when I was 9. So even when I was a kid and I started, it was 3 years into them like knowing that what I wanted to be when I grew up was a director. And so even when I was 12, on my first day on set, my mom said, you ultimately, your goal is to go to film school. She goes, I think being on set's probably the best film school in the world.
Yep.
So for my money, I've been in film school since 1995, and a very, very eager student the whole time. My interest in acting was a function of my interest in cinema, always, always, always. And acting was the way that I could be on set. And acting was my sort of access to the kind of creative infrastructure, to getting, because of acting, I got to sort of pick the brains of some of the world's greatest directors, and I got to craft and create cinema alongside some of the best people in the world. And so to answer your question, when does the transition happen? It happened before I started, like when I was a kid, I've wanted to make horror movies and action movies since for as long as I can remember. And in like grade 11, Jesse and I we had every issue of Fangoria that year. We would just swap them back and forth, and we were just big horror, and we'd make horror movies on the weekend in high school and stuff. And so even if the world kind of knows me for comedy first, anyone in my life knows that comedy was like this awesome job that I got. But it and I hate saying it like that because people think
I get it.
Ungrateful or dismissive. I'm not. I am terribly grateful and incredibly proud of the career I've had. But it's what I did for a living, and I guess if you went to high school with me, you'd be like, oh, you finally did it.
Cool, man. That's awesome. So one of the things I want to ask you about the sets you've been on your whole life and kind of what filmmakers left marks on you. My wife and I just watched This Is the End the other day, which is a great film, and also a movie that really does a good job with horror elements as well, which is very interesting. What do you have any specific points on sets that you remember that ignited certain things that may have brought you into the world you are now? I mean, I know it's kind of a loaded question, but like, are there specific moments on some of your films that you can pinpoint that you're like, oh, I learned how to shoot this way because of that shot in this movie that I was in?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I've gotten to be directed by Clint Eastwood and David Cronenberg.
One take wonder, right?
Oh, man. And so the biggest lesson from his set and from Cronenberg's set, because they've been really lucky that I got to spend a few days with each of them, and their sets are very, very similar in that the sort of industry standard for how a set should be is chaos, and people call it sort of organized chaos, but that's just hyperbole. It's just chaos. And to come onto a set where there's none of that, where you don't feel a weight of anxiety on everyone's shoulders, where everybody is in fact happy to be there and like in a good mood, because Eastwood's whole thing, and I would ask people why the vibe is so chill and what's it like, and they said the vibe is chill as long as you don't mess up, and nobody wants to be the guy that disappoints Eastwood. And so Eastwood hires the people he hires because he thinks they can do the thing he's hired them for, and that's that. And so it should be fun, and it should be efficient, and that's kind of like, those are both guys that, like, I think 3 takes, 4 takes tops kind of thing. Like, if you've got it, you've got it, and if you don't have it, I think, like, unless you're Stanley Kubrick or Fincher, when you get north of 6, 7 takes, it's because you don't know what you're looking for a lot of the time, I think. And so that was the other big thing from Cronenberg and Eastwood. They always knew exactly what every single moment of the movie they were making was, and then being on Tropic Thunder with Stiller, you know, getting
What an amazing movie, man. God, that movie's
such a spectacular film, and shooting it was as fun as watching it is for people. And people often assume, oh man, that must have been a fun thing, and the thing they're talking about often wasn't. This is the time when it was as fun as it seems, and what's so cool is, getting to see and having him getting to see how the thing was put together, but also having Ben always find time to like bring me into the monitor to show me the composition of the frame he was creating. He's like, because he knew that I cared and I was interested, so he'd always bring me, okay, see, we come in this way, helicopters come in this way, and then the camera's going to do this thing. And so he just like always included me and let me know that process, because he knew I dug it. And and then even I'm inevitably going to be forgetting some people. My best friend Jacob Tierney, who's one of my mentors, I made the Trotsky and Good Neighbors with. There's like, I pick up different things from different people, but the thing that all these guys sort of have in common is a sense of fun, a sense of we're all in this together, and it's like a version of playing cops and robbers in the backyard, and that the movie is going to go best when everybody owns their piece of it and feels as at risk as the director. I know that nobody will ever feel completely as at risk as I am, but whatever the next best thing is, that's what I want. And I want to see the fingerprints of the dozens of people that made this movie on the movie. And so in Random Acts, you are seeing the influence and mentorship of all the folks I just mentioned, and then some.
That's amazing. This is something I'm actually interested to ask you, and this is probably more of a loaded question too. I rewatched Tropic Thunder recently. I still think the way he designed the war shots were just unreal. And Cruise, that might be my favorite Cruise performance actually too. But we were watching that movie the other day, and we also watched This Is the End. And I couldn't help but watch these films, like obviously within the times that we're in now, and comedy has changed a lot. Do you feel like you got to make movies at a time that obviously I don't think This Is the End or Tropic Thunder, they were probably having a hard time getting made today. And even though Downey's bit is that he's making fun of that process, I just wonder, like, do you look back on that time and go, man, we got it all in before things got really crazy? And and do you look back on some of those movies and go, wow, we got a lot of stuff in there?
Yeah, for better or worse. There are some things I look back on and I'm like, oh God. Yeah, and it's perfectly reflective of what I thought was interesting or funny at the time, but I've grown out of. But then there's stuff like Tropic Thunder, where I'm just like, not just the Downey thing. There's a lot of difficult.
Simple Jack,
and also that every explosion in that movie is real. Like that's not CG. Like they really built everything and blew it up. Like we did the Apocalypse Now thing. Like. There's 100 things in that movie that were precluded from being made in 2020, and so it's hard not to be like, God damn, I was there when they did it, and no matter what happens, I'll be able to, like, if I ever have little ones one day, I'll be like, look what your old man got to do. Isn't this crazy? Like, because to me it's like when I look back and watch films from the silent era, like the silent Ben-Hur or Ten Commandments or something, or Hunchback or Phantom or whatever, but every stone is put there. Like when you see Ben-Hur, like those are all extras. There's no matte paintings and there's no CG. That's all they built this stuff, and it's a time capsule of an era when scale wasn't an issue. And it's a staggering thing to see, and you're like, man, what would it be like to have been there? Well, now as years go on, I now get it, because like Tropic is one of those things that's like, we'll never see that movie again, and it's really, really cool to have been involved in that thing, man, because it's like the world doesn't spend that money on funny movies ever. Do you mind if I just ask you a couple more questions before you let you go? Yeah, sure.
I'm only going to bring up This Is the End one more time, only because I just recently rewatched it. I never interviewed you for that film, and this is probably a question you've already answered a million times, but I was just curious about the design of the characters and what aspects everybody allowed about themselves to be put into the characters, and which one do you find to be closest to the real individual? I mean, like, Jonah's obviously crazy over the top, but you guys are playing on things that are real, like movies and things like that. So was there ever things that went too far that you said, okay, we got to scale back, it's too much like me? Like, I'm just interested to know the process of that movie.
Yeah,
It's insane.
It's kind of an iterative one. So it's it's hard to show up and be like, I'm not doing this. These are the things I'm willing to talk about. I'm not, but so what it ends up more being like is we do the thing, and then you get to a point where you're like, I think this is a bridge too far. I'm not comfortable, or I'm not comfortable doing this, right? And when you're being directed by two dudes that like you don't think you were 18, and like first time I went snowboarding, I was literally I was using Evan Goldberg's board and wearing his snowsuit and shit. So so when you know those guys in a deeply intimate way for a long time, you definitely feel a bit freer to be like, hey man, this is kind of messed up to me, or I think this is too much. But so I'll start with this. Danny is the least like his character. Like, yeah. Danny's the one who's playing a full character. There was none of him in there whatsoever. It's a really, really kind, considerate, very mild-mannered dude. Like this, he's not that guy. All of us are an exaggerated version of the rest of us are all exaggerated versions of ourselves. I think like I'm probably the closest in that, like, yeah, I have been accused of being holier than thou and thinking better than LA and stuff. So I think there's that. Yeah, it's a weird talk about another weird kind of process. Like, there's a lot of Dogma 95 in This Is the End. In that we just decided to go through real issues that we had with each other and mine them for jokes and story points as almost in a way of like, it's like a bit of like living therapy without any therapy. And so, cause like we're airing a lot of this shit, the grievances that Seth and I are airing in that movie are legitimate. But we also, Seth and Evan are very good writers. And so they know that like, oh, this is a strong story point too, so it's nothing if not weird. And like, there's no bigger fan of that movie than me. But I'll be honest, the entire time we were making it, I was like, who the fuck is going to want to watch this? Who's going to find us interesting? And like, I kept being worried that it would just end up being a 2-hour-long MTV Movie Awards sketch. And that was the drum I kept banging, which I'm sure was like exactly what Seth and Evan wanted to hear every day. But they knew what they were doing, and they're really strong storytellers. And the kind of like, testament to that is like, Jonah and I did each other's heads in during that fucking movie. And then I saw the first kind of rough cut that they put together, and I was like, oh, Jonah's incredible in this. And that's how I knew it was a good movie, that I was able to like give love to what Jonah did. But yeah, back then we didn't get along real well, and Seth thought it was hilarious, and so he made a movie out of it.
Man, that movie's amazing. All right, a couple more questions about your film. I'm very interested to know, you have a very specific shot that's on a license plate of the car, and I wrote it down. It was 9W3BR8Q. And I only wrote it down because I'm like, you clearly put us up to the license plate and then you drive off. Is there any significance about the numbers on the plate? Is it just completely random? I always wanted to ask that.
No, it's not the numbers. It's that it's Ontario. It's that.
Oh.
I
cool.
We do a thing up here often, which is the lamest that Americans think is the lamest, and they're correct in assuming that, which is a lot of Canadian films get made that are Canadian financed and Canadian produced and featuring Canadians and made up here. And then it comes to an insert of someone's wallet or a car, and it's like a Pennsylvania license plate, in the servile hope that, oh, this might increase our chances of getting seen in the States.
Huh.
As if there's such a thing as prohibitively Canadian. As if an American would ever see Canadian money and be like, oh, fuck this, I'm not finishing this. Like, that's just like a nonsensical proposition. So it was like greatly important to me that the thing stayed true to itself. And also, I was subtly kind of implying an experience, which is like the movie is about what it's about, but then you find little bits of daylight that you can kind of say some other things that kind of complement it, or, and one of the sort of subtexts of the movie is that it is kind of a meta version, a nightmarish meta version of what it is to drive from here down to the States, which is sometimes a scary prospect when you cross the border, and you just feel a lot more sharpened elbows, and you know that there's a lot of guns around, and that's why, and you just kind of have your guard up in a way when we cross, and I hadn't seen that reflected in a movie, and what's amazing is that, like, to Canadian eyes, they get the thing completely, and so that's what that was. Not necessarily me slagging anything off, but just articulating what it is to cross that land border, as everyone I know has done dozens of times throughout our life, and yeah, a sort of sense of impending dread that you get when you cross.
This is going to be a nerdy question only because I always wanted to know how this was done in films. I've seen it done before, but I've never asked anybody about it. When you're showing a screen, you have this amazing shot where, like, it's pulling focus on the words as he's reading them.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just interested to know, like, is that literally being pulled as it's shot? Because, I mean, like, the idea that it matches up with what he's reading, I've always found that type of shot to be interesting to me. And I would imagine it's a really hard shot to pull off.
It is, yeah. It's like, when we were putting together, when Kareem and I were talking, okay, what do we need in our camera kit? Like, what do we because different kits are different costs, and so it's like there's no crane in this movie, and so we would like, and the more specialized a toy is, the harder it is to find, and the pricier it is, and so we would like, do we want, and we really wanted to use the macro lens. We really wanted to do this kind of close-up fetishistic stuff. And I also knew that what I would be using that stuff for in the edit would be one of 3 parts of a crossfade. I kind of knew I had this sort of, like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, Coppola does a lot of that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And it ends up being kind of dreamy and super stylized, but it's also a very, very old school language. That's the language of silent cinema and the first 2 generations of cinema, where when we didn't have sound to help seal the deal, you had to say everything with what was on the screen. And so as a result, films got like a visual kind of maturity towards the end of the 20s, and then sound came in and we lost all of it. And it took us 10, 15 years to kind of find it again. And so like the first few years of sound cinema is some pretty boring imagery, because they are like tailoring their shots to the location of mics, which is just ass backwards, right? But anyway, this is all to say that some of the old language is really, really strong. And for me, there is like there's almost no new kind of techniques or vibes that affect me the way that the old stuff does. And the old stuff, by virtue of being old and not used, ends up becoming new then. And just because no one else is using it. And so yeah, macro lens, and it was a bastard to shoot. That was a
awesome shot.
That was a thank you. That was a lot of okay. Sorry. Okay. Back to no. We wanted on that thing, and it was just so yeah. It was an annoying one, but worth it.
All right, so I'll end on this because I've taken up too much of your time. But the idea of finding an ending, the way this film plays out is just incredible, and it's just such a thought-provoking film, and I can't wait for people to talk about and see, because it really kind of made me question why I watch certain things the way I do, why I enjoy certain things the way I do. In the process of getting your movie together, when do you find your ending? Do you find it at the beginning? Because your character's clearly looking for his ending throughout the movie, which I thought was a really brilliant way to tell the story. But when do you find your ending?
That's an amazing question, man. That's a really, really good question that no one's ever asked. Ideally, it should be that should be the first thing you know. In theory, you should know because that's the ultimate kind of thesis. That's the landing of the POV. That's the sort of realization of everything you've been suggesting, right? So, in theory, you should know it right away. But we wrote the first draft of the first treatment like 10 years ago, man,
Wow.
and so we grew up, and the document kind of evolved with us. And in its first incarnation, it was like terribly obvious and pretty straight ahead. And, we just tried to make as crazy a horror film as we could. But that ultimately had a sort of kind of bittersweet ending, but just, it was way more palatable and way less truthful. And every time that we thought the movie was going to happen, it died like 3 deaths before it finally became a film. And every time that we had an opportunity that then evaporated, we would always be like, okay, let's go back to the script. Let's open the hood up. We can never accept that it's as good as it can be. And the work is never done. And also it would be really crummy to finally get to make the thing and be making something that had viewpoints that we no longer subscribe to or anything like that. And so in constantly going back to it and trying to figure out, okay, is this what we're actually saying? Or is this what we think we're saying? But in fact, this is what we're saying, in trying to just have those conversations and keep beating the piss out of our document, the ending as it is revealed itself. And then once that was there, it was like, oh, it could end no other way. Any other end. And by the way, that ending was not like an easy sell. We had to fight to do it. And thank you, because there was a lot of people that were kind of interested or suggesting that there might be a more accessible way for it to land that I think would ultimately undo absolutely everything we had just done. It can end no other way, the story that we've told. And but this time on this story, it took us about like 3-4 years before we realized that.
That's amazing. Well, listen, man, congratulations. Also, give my props to your prop department, because they did a hell of a job with the practical effects and the gore. I don't know how many gallons of blood you were using, but this is truly an honor to talk to you, man. Honestly, I think you're such a great filmmaker, and I could see all the movies that I could see exactly where you get your love for films from. So I appreciate your time today, man. Thank you for letting me go a little longer with you. I appreciate it. I literally wrote so many notes during your movie. So yeah.
Jeff, that means the world, man. Truly, thank you for taking time out of your day, because when you fight 10 years to make a movie, the only thing you care about is it connecting with people, and the way that it seems to have connected with you is a really special thing. And thank you for letting me talk about it, and truly thank you for your kind words. It really, really means the world.